Bruce Wayne is a fucking idiot. I mean, everyone knows that. Just look at his fucking social media. The murder of the Waynes changed the whole national cultural perception of Gotham, one of America's most prominent cities, one of the world's most prominent cities. It went from being like New York in the 30s to like New York in the 80s. In the wake of the Wayne murders, a number of powerful crime families saw a power vacuum and really just an ownership vacuum, a sense of lawlessness from the corrupt police department to the corrupt mayor to the corrupt senators of New York State, where Gotham is located. New York City doesn't exist. This is the DC universe. Let's not play. Gotham basically became a shithole. Bruce Wayne disappeared for years. Like literally disappeared. Wayne Manor was shuttered. It was bizarre. And then, around the time he was 15, he started coming back, making public appearances, being seen at parties. Except for gossip reporters who would try to go to these parties that Bruce Wayne was at, they could never seem to find them. And yet, every year, Bruce Wayne would throw these gala parties for his birthday. People would say they saw him there and say he did something embarrassing or stupid, and yet no one really knew Bruce Wayne. If you've read American Alien, you know this lack of attention to detail in Batman's Bruce Wayne persona is what led in issue 3 to Clark Kent being able to simply walk on the boat and be like, I'm Bruce Wayne, even though he doesn't even look like Bruce. At the top levels of wealth, there were a lot of rumors about Bruce Wayne, namely that he was dead, an addict, or didn't exist. But by the time Bruce Wayne was 21, he was back in Gotham and a public presence in the worst way. This is a guy. Imagine Dan Bilzerian if Dan Bilzerian thought he was Elon Musk. Bruce Wayne is the worst. A pseudo-intellectual with a loose grip on the technologies and policies which his money forwards. A fool and a buffoon. And talk about his politics. No, seriously, try to talk about Bruce Wayne's politics. You can't. He's the sort of guy who's too rich to be political. Literally, if you ask Bruce Wayne, like, where do you stand on the issues? 95% of the time, he will say something like, oh, you know, they're all corrupt. It's all the same to me. I don't vote. And people will be like, you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company? Yeah, but you know, Lucius runs all that. A man named Lucius Fox runs almost all of the Wayne companies and Wayne shell holdings. You also have to keep in mind that legacies of the Wayne businesses are actually spread all over the world. The technologies that the Waynes innovated, the things they built, the hospitals they built all over America in the 60s shaped our country. And let's not even get started on the weapon systems they designed. You know, there's a lot of conspiracies online that both Wayne Tech and LexCorp have secret programs involving fringe, disgraced scientists competing behind the scenes, a kind of Cold War of technologies beyond anything in current comprehension. But that's probably all bullshit, right? Right? I mean, no one would actually give Jonathan Crane money to research his fear gas idea. Jonathan Crane was kicked out of Miskatonic University. This guy is a freak. He's obsessed with fear. You can't give him funding. But Wayne did. I mean, that's just a rumor. No one really knows where the serial killer who came to be known as the Scarecrow came from. Actually, that's not true. I know. You see, when Joe Chill shot Thomas and Martha Wayne, he committed 3 murders. He also killed Bruce Wayne. David Kane, the Wayne's personal bodyguard and chief of security, had literally turned his back for 2 minutes to allow the Waynes to take a walk with their son alone. Crime Alley was beautiful. It was filled with neon. The name Crime Alley was a holdover from another era of Gotham. It should have been safe. David confronted Bruce that night. Bruce, still reeling in trauma from seeing his parents murdered in front of him, listened to everything David said. But what David couldn't realize is that as he said these words, they were slowly pushing Bruce Wayne out of the child's ears and letting something else in. Control, David Kane said. Control is the only way to protect the ones you love. Safety is control. Power is control. Love is control. The psychological damage this piece of advice did in the wake of witnessing a horrific tragedy cannot be overstated. And the cost, the human cost of what Bruce Wayne became after that night is catastrophic and astronomical. But you can also make an argument that the risk was worth the reward. You see, Bruce Wayne took all that money, all that potential, and he turned it into something terrifying. For a full decade after the murder of his parents, Bruce Wayne poured all of his resources into training and technology and steadily grew to become one of the most dangerous men on planet Earth. In private, he was still Bruce to Alfred, the butler that had once been a father figure but now steadily grew more fearful of him. But in public, he became known as something else, a creature called the Batman. The Batman operated in Gotham and attacked Gotham criminals. But the thing is, the Batman is a nightmare. It is a ridiculously wealthy civilian with a mental illness, dressed in an armor that makes him look like an oily bat monster, driving a vehicle that is a military-grade armored tank with a jet. And yeah, he doesn't kill people, but Batman doesn't stop short of fucking paralyzing people. And those hits he throws, there's fucking lead in those gloves. He could have killed someone on any night. The fact that the Batman only ever killed 2 criminals is amazing. The Batman, while fighting and attacking criminals, destabilizing drug rings successfully, destabilizing human trafficking rings successfully, stopping serial killers, bank robbers, corrupt politicians, cartels from other countries. The Batman, you could argue, was a hero. But the brain behind the Batman would get too focused on certain aspects of what it meant to be Batman and ignore others. Easy example. Do you have any idea how many people were murdered because of Batman? Batman shows up and ruins a drug shipment. You really think the general of that drug shipment is going to survive in jail? No, he's murdered that night for failing to defend against a monster that everyone barely believes exists. And we're not even talking about civilian and law enforcement casualties. Normal people and police would regularly be drawn into steadily escalating confrontations between the Batman and a host of increasingly bizarre, eccentric, and well-armed terrorists, serial killers, and freaks. The Ace Chemicals processing plant, which is on the east side of Gotham, became basically a hub of corporate theft and malfeasance. LexCorp secretly owned Ace Chemicals and clandestinely would indeed hire fringe scientists who had been discredited in other fields or their home countries. The thing is, most of these people had psychological problems that they had not addressed, and being given this amount of power and influence, even in secret, led to a lot of these people, like Jervis Tetch or Pamela Isley, having full-on mental breakdowns and experimenting with their own technology. The amount of, corporate backstabbing and undercutting that directly led to the creation of motherfucking serial killers in Gotham in response to the constant feeling that there was a monster lurking behind you. The Batman was a mistake. Ask the victims of the Joker, a guy who would not exist until he figured out the easiest way to become famous was by attacking Batman. For those who don't know, the Joker is actually a clout-chasing pseudo-intellectual named Aaron Scott, more excited about the attention he gets from being a supervillain than any homicidal bloodlust. And that has to do with Bruce's choice to become Batman. Every time you see Batman, what you're actually seeing, whether he's smiling, whether he's angry, whether he's hitting someone, if his costume's blue or gray or yellow or black, whether it's latex or armor, whether there's knives or whether he's dark and broody, it doesn't matter. What you are seeing is someone who is failing to process trauma and translating that into violence. That is who Batman is. That is what he is. That is what he represents. It's okay to hurt people because someone hurt me a long time ago. I'm allowed to hurt all the people I think are bad, because you have to keep in mind there don't have to be criminal charges against you for Bruce Wayne to show up in the back of your car and break your fucking jaw, okay? He can just do that. Also, he's a great detective, but he's not always right. Batman makes mistakes, especially in the first 2 years of his operation, constantly. And the ripple effect of his presence socially, culturally, criminally is massive. You can make a real argument that Lex Luthor's private team of assassins, who he costumed, who Bruce Wayne encountered in his training period, may have influenced the idea of Batman. Yeah, you can make an argument that Lex Luthor is responsible for the superhero phenomenon, but you'd be wrong. Batman is responsible for the superhero phenomenon. And Batman doesn't even exist. He's a fucking imaginary friend Bruce Wayne made up to hide the fact that his mother got her fucking head exploded open in front of him. The whole fucking front of her head came off when the bullet hit. Her eye was gone. It was hanging out. Bruce saw that. Blood was on him. He's not okay. He has never been to therapy. The issue with trauma like this, the issue really with any problem that you're trying to self-soothe in an indirect way, like, oh, I'm gonna deal with the fact that my parents got murdered by learning how to become a ninja. The problem is this trauma begins to become disassociated from the events that actually caused the trauma and begins to outgrow those events and change what you do and essentially perpetuate itself. This is a real psychological phenomenon. That's why addiction happens, because people are running from something. They don't want to feel like themselves. Some addiction is genetic, but most of it is psychological and then becomes physical once a chemical's involved. Even just a chemical in the brain. Bruce Wayne is addicted to being Batman because it's the only thing that keeps him from the pain he has never processed. An argument could be made that what Bruce Wayne did for Dick Grayson changed his life in a positive way. He adopted him after witnessing the murder of his parents. Bruce, who had gone to Haley's Circus for a paparazzi event so he'd be seen there, his trauma completely came out, and he was seen in public doing this, fucking sobbing after the flying Graysons fell and died and the little boy was sitting over them. Reality. So when Bruce began sobbing convulsively and screaming at Haley's Circus, Dick Grayson literally looked up from his dead parents to see the only person in the audience who was making noise. Everyone else was shocked into silence when they fell. Why did Bruce take in Richard Grayson? Does Bruce love Richard Grayson? Who knows? Batman has shoved Bruce so far down that when he saw a child in the same situation he was in, he saw it as an opportunity to create a second Batman. What? No! Dick Grayson mentally at this point was a child, and number two, hugely traumatized, and number three, had been part of a traveling family and had never really had a home. So now I live with this billionaire and he wants me to do these drills where we fight? Oh, and he kicks me at full force to teach me lessons? Wait, this is abuse. No, this is not abuse. This is training. I'm not a slave. I'm a partner. I'm Robin. He's fucking brainwashed! Now, of course, we put a lot of modern ideas about the way these types of psychological interpersonal relationships work now. What Bruce was doing to Richard Grayson was basically what the Spartans used to do. It's what many cultures have done throughout time immemorial. Humans have been pretty fucked up before now. But in my personal opinion, the way I would describe it is that Batman was trying to create its own culture. Batman began to spread to other people. The commissioner of Gotham was a man named James Gordon, who found himself in an impossible situation. Capitulate to an incredibly wealthy criminal and perpetuate the lie that he is a monster, or Batman's gonna get rid of you too. So Commissioner Gordon would work with the Batman and help him and show him respect out of fear. It's a civilian in a costume with weapons who arrives in a tank. What are the cops gonna do? Also, by the way, Batman, super smart, helps save people, puts his life on the line, so he is a hero. But if he's a hero, why is he looking at me like that? Those white eyes, are they lenses? What is that? Of course, Commissioner Gordon, you saw what happened to him on the news. He was kidnapped by Aaron Scott, the Joker, dosed with LSD, trapped in a fucking carnival, assaulted horribly and tortured, and then Joker paralyzed his daughter. I should also mention that as a way of controlling Commissioner Gordon, Batman essentially seduced, not sexually, but intellectually, the daughter of Commissioner Gordon, Barbara Gordon, and basically was like, hey, you can be a superhero too. And you know who he fucking used to recruit this untrained teenager to be his fucking crime-fighting ally? Oh yeah, he used the fucking kid he adopted, Dick Grayson. Batman was never a stable enterprise. Before re-emerging as Bruce Wayne, Wayne lived for 2 years as a criminal called Bane, trying to get a really good idea of the shape of Gotham's underworld. He then killed off this personality and switched over to a new personality called Matches Malone. But as Lois Lane closed in on Matches Malone, he had to get rid of him too. That meant day to day, by the height of the Batman's power, he existed apparently in 2 modalities. 1, the Batman, and 2, a fake Bruce Wayne incapable of real connection or real growth, frozen forever in time as an image Batman had created. But what Batman didn't know is that this Bruce was plotting against him. Wayne was terrified of Batman and had sought help with a psychiatrist named Hugo Strange. Hugo Strange was actually the guy who had successfully treated Harvey Dent for his dissociative identity disorder in Arkham. Oh, yeah, Harvey rehabilitated after his reign of terror as Two-Face basically started the supervillain phenomena, but he's just trapped in Arkham for the rest of his life. He killed like 40 people. His face is fixed. He's better, but like, everyone wants him to get the death penalty? Well, that was until the Riddler showed up and then Poison Ivy and then the Mad Hatter, the Ultra Humanite. What the fuck is going on? What is Killer Croc? There's a monster that lives in the sewer? What's that thing in the sky at night? Is it a plane or, oh my god, it's a guy with a jetpack and a flamethrower. What happened to real life? Hugo Strange made a startling discovery in his sessions with Bruce over 6 months. The Bruce Wayne identity and the Batman identity were no longer the only identities living inside of Wayne's psychology. Wayne had compartmentalized his psychological framework to such a deep extent that there appeared to be multiple other personalities, or at least conceptual ideas of personalities, modalities of behavior, working behind the scenes. There was the Caped Crusader, an idealized version of Batman that had a good relationship with Dick Grayson, Robin. They were best friends and went on adventures together, lighthearted romps against criminals. Just so we're clear, this is this dude internally justifying putting a child in front of a row of AK-47s firing at them and going, hey, just flip around, do gymnastics, don't let them shoot you. And if you get shot a few times, it's okay, you have body armor. At this point, Bruce Wayne had already lost Dick Grayson. After he had attempted to take the hero called Superman under his wing, or rather in at his pawn. It kind of backfired on him in a major way. If you're curious about how Bruce Wayne's relationship with Dick Grayson was fractured and Dick Grayson stopped being Robin, why don't you watch the Agent of Batman video? And yet there were other personalities in there too. A superhuman Batman who could fly, who was from a distant planet and wore a blue, red, and yellow suit and no mask, called the Batman of Zur-En-Ah. And then of course Matches Malone was still kicking around in there, and he had no idea what was going on because he didn't know he was Batman. Talk about getting lost in the sauce. Bruce Wayne was able to get to a mental state where he was so undercover that he wasn't undercover. When Matches Malone was Matches Malone, he was Matches Malone. And Matches Malone is still in there going, why am I dressed as Batman? And then of course there's Bane. In the shadows, Bane, watching. He was just a ruse at first. The perfect criminal. Someone who every other criminal would want to know. A personal acquaintance of Lex Luthor. Bruce Wayne was finally seeing the truth about Batman. That the whole idea was insane. An endless crusade of vigilante, violent justice against those he personally deemed worthy of punishment? Insane. Also at this point, Batman had come up against essentially a better version of Batman. Sure, not as effective in combat, and the technology wasn't as good, and he's not a ninja. Right across the fucking river from Gotham is a city called Bloodhaven, a place that in roughly the same amount of time Batman had existed, went from a slum to a fucking paradise. And why, you ask? Because of the appearance of a mysterious force called the Blue Beetle. The Blue Beetle started out flipping the entire police force, essentially targeting corrupt cops, and then using the fact that they were corrupt to make them work for him. No one knew who the Blue Beetle was, and Bloodhaven was the most corrupt police department in the United States. Many of the cops from Gotham who were scared of Batman had fled there, turning Bloodhaven into a criminalized shithole run by an asshole named Blockbuster. Once the Blue Beetle flipped the police department and basically turned them into his private Avengers, he then flipped the fucking corrupt Justice Department and brought good people in from all over the country. Then he hit the fucking mayor's office. And then he did the sheriff's department. And then all that great Blue Beetle technology, it started showing up in the city's infrastructure. Public transportation worked again. The place was clean. The plants were watered. The trash was picked up. And you had Beetle bots building fucking homeless shelters. Batman hated the Blue Beetle because the Blue Beetle was the caped crusader. It was the thing, that perfect thing that he wished he could be. But what's he separated from there? Hope, freedom, generosity. That's the Blue Beetle. What does Batman represent? Revenge, fear, control. These things have a place in human society, but when we institutionalize them, it always turns out bad. And if you put one billionaire in charge of a whole city and make him personally responsible to beat up criminals, it doesn't make sense. It's a nightmare. By the time Aaron Scott murdered the Batman's second Robin, a reprobate named Jason Todd, Bruce Wayne's psychology was almost completely fractured. The guy was living in a dream. Bruce Wayne could no longer cope with the world the Batman had created for him. Bruce Wayne watched on television as Clark Kent, Superman, his society, finally was able to arrest Lex Luthor for the blackmail of the Flash, Barry Allen. I don't think that was the last straw. I think that was just something he saw, but he lit his whole house on fire. Wayne Manor's burning was visible for miles. The bats launching up from the caves underneath it. What was exploding in caves under Wayne Manor? Well, to clarify this, Batman had used that system of caves to turn into a basic command center hub, a military-grade operations base. And now he was burning all that too and self-destructing it. All of his old suits, the Robin costumes, all of his weird serial killer trophies from criminals he'd beaten up, all of them burning and falling. Eventually, he reached the deepest point of the cave, where a number of bats had hidden, slowly being suffocated by the smoke. At this point, Wayne's Batman mask had revealed a secondary function, a Bane mask that dropped down that allowed him to see body and thermals. He was using it to blind himself so he could only see white. Bruce Wayne, at the depths of hell, lay and watched the world around him burn. When through the fire came a burning angel. If he'd been watching closely, he might have recognized a wisp of orange smoke in the air.